Thank you. So I wanted to start this talk off with a very short video. So let's watch it together.
So let me start with what I think is the more immediate concern. That's a solvable problem, but we have to be mindful of it. And that is this category of specialized AI. If you've got a computer that can play Go, this is a pretty complicated game with a lot of variations. Developing an algorithm that simply says maximize profits on the New York Stock Exchange is probably within sight.
If you were a hedge fund or private equity fund, you said, well, all I want my AI to do is maximize the value of my portfolio, then the AI could decide, well, the best way to do that is to short consumer stocks, go long defense stocks, and start a war. And that would also be quite bad.
Much like the power of the atom lied dormant throughout human history, patiently waiting there until 1945. In this century, scientists may learn to awaken the power of artificial intelligence. And I think we might then see an intelligence explosion.
So I heard some of you chuckle. Our generation here today, the millennials, we are set to be the first generation to experience the singularity. The time where artificial intelligence becomes more intelligent than human beings. Within 10 years, we will be able to buy a computer for $1,000 which has the same capacity as a human brain. I started researching this topic because of one reason, right? And that reason was that I got asked a question too many times. The question was asked by Swedish Television, P3 Vision, Ny Teknik, all of these different journalists. And they kept asking me, Nicholas, won't your robots take jobs from human beings? And there's two answers to this question, right? The first answer is the short-term answer, the linear answer. And that entails 2, possibly 3 years. And the answer is no, right? There's still things that we as human beings can do today which creates value. Healthcare, for example, that's a place where we can still create a lot of value. Then there's the second answer. The answer which is the exponential answer, the 15-year answer. And that answer is that 57% of all of the jobs which exist today will disappear. That's the majority of the jobs which exist today will be gone. I see some of you here right now, right? And you have this feeling in your stomach, right? The singularity, a computer which has the same capacity as a human brain, right? Half of the jobs disappearing. It doesn't sit right in your stomach. You have a feeling. And that feeling is being created by your limbic system, right? It's the part of your brain that's been there since we were monkeys. So that part of your brain was developed when we were in the savannah, right? And we were looking at a gazelle running through the horizon. And it ran at 50 kilometers an hour, right? The sun rose and the sun set. We lived in a linear world. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That was the context where this part of our brain grew up. And that's why you have that feeling right now. That's because you and your feelings are linear. They are not exponential. So let's try to, together, during this talk, be in our prefrontal cortex, right? Let's think about this data and let's think about this research together. So, luckily, this is not the first time that we've gone through an information revolution as human beings. We've done this before. And there's things that we can learn from our past so that we can apply it today. So let's look at our past and how we perceive our past. So this is pretty much how we perceive our past, right? We were hunters and gatherers for a pretty long time, and then we were farmers, and then we worked in manufacturing, and now we work in service, right? This is how we think our past looked like. But as you can see, the x-axis here is completely skewed. It's completely off. That's because our history looks more like this. We were hunters and gatherers and farmers for the majority of our history. It wasn't until the last 600-700 years that we started working within manufacturing and services. Why is this? Why did it take such a long time for us to go from hunters and gatherers to farmers? Well, the answer lies in the technology and the tools that we used when we were hunters and gatherers. And what was the one tool which was greater than all the other tools when we were hunters and gatherers? It wasn't fire, it wasn't the wheel. I had this talk once and this guy yelled out, "It was the stick," right? It wasn't the stick. What it was what I'm doing now. It was speech, it was talking to each other. It was communicating information and innovation. That was the greatest tool that we had as hunters and gatherers. So if we were hunters and gatherers, and I wanted to convey information to you guys here, for example, my face, right? I would have to walk up to every single person and show you my face, right? And that's because the way we conveyed information was limited to our physical being. It was limited to our flesh. What do you call this, by the way? Narcissism. Thank you very much. Thanks. So this is why it took such a long time for us to go from hunters and gatherers to farmers. It took 6,000 years until farming came to Sweden from the first time that it was invented. 6,000 years. Then we keep going and we get to about 3000 BC and we invent writing, right? And what is writing? Well, what we did was we took information and made it immortal, right? We disconnected information from our bodies and made it immortal. What did that allow us to do? Well, it allowed us to build cities, right? We could organize in tribes bigger than just 150 people because we could keep track of who is who owns what, who's married to who, right? So we built the pyramids. We became kings and queens, and we created churches and priests, right? But there's a gap from 3000 BC until the exponential growth that we see today. So it wasn't writing in and of itself that caused this. So what was it? Well, it was an innovation. What innovation? Well, it wasn't the car, the electricity, the steam engine, spinning jenny, the phone, the radio. It wasn't any of these. The innovation that I'm talking about led to all of these. Can anyone guess what it was? I hear some whispering. Come on, please.
I don't know the English word.
Thank you. The printing press. Exactly. Because what the printing press did was it democratized information. It made the tool for cooperating and spreading knowledge something that everyone could have. So before the printing press, about 1% of the population could write and read. Who were they? Of course, they were the noblemen, the kings and the queens and the churches and the priests. So if I was a priest, right, and you were my constituents, I would tell you that I have a book which I can read. And you should follow this book and everything that says in this book. And you ask me, well, what does it say? Can I read it? No, you can't. I'm the only one who can read it. but I can convey the information to you, right? So I can tell you exactly how to live your lives, and you can just listen to me, and then you won't go to hell. Sounds like a fair deal, right? And they exploited this information, right? They exploited this power. So what they did was they made something up that's called a letter of indulgence. And this letter of indulgence was something that you could buy from your priest, right? So if you want, oh, I forgot the name. What was the name of the club? Gasken, yeah. So if you wanted to go to Gasken tonight, then you would buy one of these from your priests. And what you could do then was you could cheat on your wife or husband, you could kill someone, it would be okay, right? Because God forgave you. This is the power of information. And when the printing press came, the books came. We went from 1 million to 1 billion books. And with the books came the literacy, from 1% to 60% literacy. So what happened? Well, people started reading the Bible. And they saw that this letter of indulgence is bullshit. Right? So they started questioning power structures. They started to question how society was built. And the innovations started to come. So the spinning jenny took 119 years to spread outside of Europe. Compare that to 6,000 years, right? You have the steam engine, 89 years until it stood for a huge part of the Swedish economy. And here you can see what Ray Kurzweil calls the law of accelerating returns. More advanced civilizations develop quicker because they are more advanced. The steam engine allowed books to spread faster. That is why we're seeing this accelerating exponential effect. So we started to spread books quicker. We started to question more structures, right? Now we hadn't only reading the Bible, apparently we're mutated naked monkeys, right? What do you think the churches thought about this? We kept questioning structures and questioning power. This is what we did. And then we get to the 1900s. The car, 19 years it took for Ford to make 15 million cars. And ever since the 20th century in America, the 20th century, right? Well, something that we've done ever since then, the last 120 years, is that we've followed this cyclical development. And the people here who have studied economics, you know this, right? This is one of the first things that you get to learn. They show you this information as if it's an absolute truth. This is how the world works, like gravity. And that is that we create innovations which lead to specialization, which leads to higher living standards. And we've gone through this, right? 120 years of this. It's gotten us to where we are today. But the problem with this is just like the church before it, a structure which we are questioning today. This will not and cannot be our future. This isn't a law. Why can I say this? Well, it's because you need to see the context we are living in today to be able to see that this absolute truth is an absolute lie the next coming 5 years. And the context we are living in today is this. So look at GM. GM was the company that stood for the industrial age, right? 800,000 employees in the 70s. Google, the new paradigm, the new company, 72,000 employees. They have about 8 times as much revenue as GM. This is the new paradigm, right? This is the new world we're living in. GM is the old paradigm. That's how the world used to work. You can take Amazon also, for example, $136 billion US dollars in revenue. Half the employees as GM. And some of you are probably thinking, well, this is apples and pears. They're not the same thing. Well, look at Blockbuster, the retail store, video, what do you call it in Swedish? We had this before, where you go and rent videos, right? Blockbuster was exactly that. They sold content. They had 84,000 employees. Netflix made Blockbuster go out of business. They have 5% the amount of employees. This is only going to get worse. The next 15 years, this is going to escalate. And it's not only retail that this is going to affect, it's going to affect every single market. So look at Wall Street. You have the crash of 2008, 2009, right? They let tens of thousands of people go. Today, some of us like to think that we've recovered, right? We're back on track. So you'd think that we would hire people on Wall Street, but they're not. They have about the same amount of people that they had after they fired people during the crash. They call it the jobless recovery because they're not hiring. The AIs are doing the work. JP Morgan Chase recently released a report where they said that they had 180 people working with checking law agreements. This is jobs which students usually take when they first get out of college, right? That's 360,000 hours of work every year. They replaced these 180 people with an AI that did the work in 1 minute. This is the world we're living in today, right? So how do we cope with this, right? What can we do about this, right? How can we make sure that we're not on the wrong end of this stick? Well, there's 3 things that we can do. The first thing is to implement constant learning. Right? So the old paradigm, the way that the world used to work, was that you went to school, you learned a bunch of stuff, you go out of school, and then you implement what you learn, right? You have EY, McKinsey, they released recently a report where they said that they see no effect whatsoever on academic history on their employees. If they employ someone from Chalmers or someone who has no academic background, they may create about the same value in the company. So they're starting to stop looking at people's what they've been studying before, because it's pretty much irrelevant. What is relevant is that you employ constant learning in your life, right? If you take 10% of the time that you work and you read something new about some new technology, you take your time either out of your work or privately to always have a book in your hand, that will make sure that you, when you are one of the 180 people, you have something that you can do, right? You have some value that you can create. The second thing is that you should not rely or plan on becoming an expert. Because just as the loan checkers, you could be the #1 expert on checking loans, right? You could work with it for 15 years, right? You're super efficient. You have a structure. You're at least like 20% better than all of your colleagues. People try to employ you to their companies to check the loans, right? Because you are so good at what you do. Software, you can copy it. So as soon as someone finds a solution to get rid of this job, you copy and you paste. And then all of your expertise, 15 years of it will be gone. And how do you think that this works in organizations, right? If an organization has a bunch of experts, do you think that these experts will want to employ stuff like this into the company, where they themselves become redundant? So what should you do instead? Well, you become an expert at being a beginner, right? You become an expert at doing new things, coming into a problem and structuring it in a certain way, seeing everything from a structural point of view. That is what you want to do. You don't want to become an expert at one specific topic. Third thing, don't feel stressed. Risk for stress when two channels affect the family. Can you imagine if you just hop them on a time machine and take them to today? A lot of people feel stressed today because they can't get a hold of all the information, right? You have to make a decision. You have to structure something. You want all the information, and it's really difficult to get it. Today, you can't get all the information. It is a physical impossibility. The amount of data on the internet is doubling every other year. In 4 years, compared to today, the internet will double in size every other month. What this means to all of you here is that compared to all of the knowledge in the world, you were smarter when you came in here than you are right now. And it's not my fault. It's because we're living in an exponential world, right? So what do you do about it? Well, you implement what Jeff Bezos, the CEO of Amazon, calls the day one mentality. What's the day one mentality? Well, you act within your private life and in your company as if it's the first day of your newly started, your own company, right? Raise your hands, anyone who has started a company here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, okay. Anyone sell anything retail? Yeah? So you know exactly what I'm talking about. The first day of your newly started company, how does it look? Well, you need a supplier, right? You need someone to make whatever it is you want to sell. So you Google, how do I set up a supply agreement, right? Enter. And you take in the key points, right? You take in about 70% of the information, the most important parts, and then you act on it. You might not have gotten the best agreement, but you got an agreement. Then you move on. You need a website. I have no idea how to make a website. I've never made a website in my entire life. You Google it. How do I make a website? Enter. You look at the key points. You see WordPress is apparently good. I don't know. You get a template. You make it, right? It works. It's not perfect, but it works. You take in 70% of the information and you act on it. Because today, you won't be able to get the rest of the 30%. You won't be able to get 95% of the information. It is a physical impossibility. A lot of companies today are stuck in what we used to call analysis paralysis, right? You analyze a subject way too long because you want to get all the information. And your competition, they're going, right? They're going with 70% of the information. And they get there, right? So you're 6 months behind. And in an exponential world, 6 months means 2 years. And then you're out. So, all of this is because we live in an exponential world. And I want to talk about this feeling that some of you maybe still have, right? So if I ask you, what will the world look like in 10 years? What do? Well, we need a reference point. So our best reference point, our only reference point, is the past. So we go back to 2008, and we look at how did our 2008 look like? So we apparently had iPods, I think they were called. Our cell phones had buttons. Blu-ray was apparently a thing. And our robots were still tethered. They had just about learned to walk, right? This was our 2008. So we take this data point, and we compare it to today. Then we get a line, right? Our limbic system gets happy. Finally, I have a line, right? So what did our 2018 look like? Well, our robots are not tethered anymore. They're starting to walk around. They can handle unforeseen things, and they can handle our cluttered world, pretty much. Our cars have started to drive themselves. Not legally, I might say. What they're doing is illegal, but they're still doing it. We have quantum computers. I can't go into this topic. I don't have time. Google it. This is going to change computing forever. And then we have, of course, AI. Neural networks, deep learning, right? This is affecting our world extremely much, okay? So this is our 2018. I don't want to make you think that robots will walk on our streets tomorrow, because they won't. They won't be walking on our streets next year. The point I'm making is that we live in an exponential world, right? This is our robots today, right? They're having problems in unstructured environments. And he went down, right? This is how it looks today, right? So they won't be walking on our streets tomorrow. They won't. So now we have 2 data points, and we can apply it forward. And we know that the world is going a little bit quicker now, so we put on a little bit extra added value there, and that's how we predict the future. But exponential effects don't give a about your lines, because it looks like this. We tend to overestimate the next year or 2, and we grossly underestimate the next coming 10 years. So, I want to do a little thought experiment with you here. And I have 2 rules. The rules are very simple. We have an empty bottle. And in this empty bottle, we place 1 bacteria. And this bacteria doubles every minute. The second rule is that we place the bacteria in the bottle at 11 o'clock, and at 12, the bottle is full of bacteria. Right? Bacteria doubles every minute. 1 becomes 2, becomes 4, becomes 8, becomes 16. We place it in the bottle at 11 o'clock, and at 12, the bottle is full. Are you with me? Yeah? So my first question is this. When is the bottle half full? 11:59, exactly. 1 minute to midnight. My second question is a rhetorical question. And that question is this. If you were a bacteria, when would you realize that you have a capacity problem? I can give you a tip. At 11:56, the bottle is 6% full. You've been in the bottle for 56 minutes, and you've barely created a cohesive liquid on the bottom, right? And you and your friends look up, and you see 94% free space, right? Who is going to raise their hand then and say that we have a capacity issue? It's 4 minutes till midnight. We've had computers for about 60 years, and they've been doubling every other year. We are at 6%. This is why I can stand here and comfortably say that we will live through the singularity. We will see 57% of the jobs disappearing. It's because of exponential effects, right? I hope some of your feelings in your gut there has disappeared and you're in your prefrontal cortex now, right? So how do we handle this, right? How can we use this information? Well, there's two practical examples that I want to give you. One is from my work, right? So the robots which I work with at the hospital, we had to procure them 7 years before the hospital was built because of infrastructure, right? You need the measurements of the robots. So we did that, but we didn't buy the entire robot. We just bought the shell. All of the critical components in the robot were not procured until 2 weeks before the hospital was built, because of the exponential effect of the battery technology, the laser measuring technology, all the computer inside the robots. 7 years gives you a lot more, right? These robots would have been super old if we wouldn't have factored in the exponential effects. Another example is Siri. Tom Gruber had the idea of making Siri 2007, and he did a little calculation on a piece of napkin, and he saw that, well, this software is way too advanced for the telephones, the mobile phones of the day. So what he did was he plotted out the technological development, and he saw that 2010, on the dot, is when cell phones will be able to handle Siri. So he got funding, he got some colleagues, they started working on Siri, and they worked on it for 3 years. So when 2010 came along, the new iPhone was released, and they released Siri on the App Store. What do you think Apple did? They panicked. They saw that we're 3 years behind. They're so far ahead of us, we don't have a chance of releasing our own app, right? So they bought Siri for $300 million. That's the power of thinking exponentially. So all of this is thanks to the internet, right? This wonderful thing. And what do we use the internet for? Except for cat videos. Well, we use it for the exact same thing that we used the book press before it. We use it for communicating, spreading knowledge, and questioning structures, questioning power. And how are we communicating? Well, or cooperating, sorry. Well, we're cooperating peer-to-peer, right? You and me, we can cooperate. You can give me a service, I can pay you, I can sell you something, and you pay me, right? How many here own a car? Raise your hand, right? How many of you use your car more than 6 hours a day? Keep your hand up. No one. So most of you who own a car here, your car is standing still for 18 hours a day, at least. I made a little calculation on the train here, and I saw that about 5 crowns an hour, right, is what your car costs when it stands still, a new car, over a lifespan of 10 years. It's 5 crowns. Could you imagine all of Gothenburg, all of the cars? How much value is being lost and destroyed because of this? And this is a good lesson to think about, right? So you will see disruption where there is value being lost. Where there's value being destroyed, that's where you will see disruption. So the car industry is just one example. What else are we doing? Well, we're spreading knowledge. What kind of knowledge are we spreading? Well, the Human Genome Project took 13 years and cost about $3 billion. Halfway through the project, they had mapped about 1% of the human genome, and they were about to give up. But the people who know how to think exponentially, they were like, dude, you're almost done, right? 1%, 2%, 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, you're done, right? So they got done. 1% after 7 years, 13 years, they mapped it. I did the same thing. I mapped my DNA. It took me 2 weeks, not 13 years, and it cost me 1,500 crowns. What kind of information did I learn? Well, apparently, I'm more Neanderthal than most people. I'm 4% Neanderthal. I think that's way too much. What else did I learn? Well, I learned that I had hereditary hemochromatosis and age-related macular degeneration. What does that mean? Well, if I eat too much iron, my liver will give up. If I don't eat vegetarian, I will be blind by the time I'm 70. What do I do with this information? I'm a vegetarian, right? This is preventative healthcare. By taking these decisions, I will have 20 years more of my life healthy, and I will save the Swedish government hundreds of thousands of crowns in healthcare. If you want to save the Swedish healthcare system, this is how you do it. I also got to learn that I have wet earwax. I'm lactose tolerant, I'm over average weight, and I have no back hair. I don't know why I wanted to know that, but they told me so. What else are we doing? Well, we're questioning structures, right? We're questioning power. We all know this today. We're questioning the patriarchy, right? When we grew up, or when I grew up at least, you could be two things. You could be heterosexual or homosexual. That was what you could be, right? Today we're questioning this. We're saying that it might be on a spectrum. You could be anywhere on this line, right? And you can think whatever you want about this, right? You can say whatever you want and have whatever opinions you want. It doesn't matter. What matters is that these are the structures we're questioning due to how we communicate the knowledge we're spreading, right? We're cooperating. This is like the church before it. We're also questioning what it means to work. The 8-hour work week, Monday to Friday. This won't be our future. My office is Espresso House on Odenplan in Stockholm, right? That is my office. I sit there, I drink coffee, and I work. On Fridays, I might not want to work. On Saturdays, I might want to work. I can work 16 hours on a Saturday because I feel inspired, because I want to, not because I have to. These are the structures we're questioning. So I want to talk about our generation. What do you see in this picture? Do you see a young child reading a book? Do you also see her father going up to his bookshelf, looking through all the books that he has read, picking out a book that's suitable for his 8-year-old daughter and giving it to her? What do you see here? Do you see a mentor in the background? We're the first generation that's been raised like this, right? And I think that this has had two main consequences for us, for our generation. And the first one is that we have pretty skewed expectations on life. So we were raised by our parents, and our parents were raised by our grandparents, right? And our grandparents were raised in the time after the war. So they had focus on two things: having food on their tables and making sure that their family survives, because these things weren't obvious for them, right? So what did they do when they raised our parents? They told them that there's 2 goals in life, right? Get a job so that you have food on your table, and make sure that you get married. That was what they told our parents. So what did our parents do? They had pretty low expectations on life, right? They thought that they would just work and get a family. But they grew up in the 60s, 70s, right? The hippie movement. They had the sexual revolution, right? They grew up in a time that was so much better than what they expected. And this you could define as happiness. When you get more than you thought that you would get. So what did they tell us? They told us, life is awesome, right? You can become an astronaut, a president, a policeman, an artist. You can become whatever you want, right? So we grew up thinking, wow, I'm going to be a president in outer space fighting criminals, right? We thought life was going to be so awesome. But then we go out of school and we notice that life slaps you in the face, right? Our expectations are higher than the reality we are living in. And you can see this in the technology that we use, right? We show everyone how wonderful our lives are, right? We show everyone that I have lived up to my expectations on life. I'm getting into the age where I see on my Facebook all of my friends are getting kids, and this is all I ever see every single day. All these babies, and they're so wonderful, right? They're so cute and cuddly, and you just want to eat them up. Reality is something completely different. I go home to my friends and I see that they're miserable. So we, as a generation, need to put a lid on our expectations, right? We need to realize that when we go out into the workforce, we are not going to become CEOs within 2 years. Right? This means also for the company representatives here, if there are any, raise your hands if there are any company representatives, good. What it means also for you is that you need to give us a clear line to succeed. If you do not give us a way to walk to succeed, we will leave you because we will find someone else who will. The other way that we have been influenced by the technology is that I think about my grandma. When I go home to her, I know exactly what I'm going to expect. I get out of the car, she's standing on the driveway, she gives me a hug, and she asks me one thing every single time. Have you eaten anything? And you say no. And she takes you by the neck, she puts you at the dinner table, and you're stuck there the entire weekend, right? She's just feeding you, because she prioritizes food and family. We prioritize something completely different. We prioritize meaning in our lives. We are born on the top of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And what is there? Well, there's meaning, right? We want meaning. We want meaning in the products we buy and the places we work. So when we look at this, we don't see a good car. We see a company that wants to save the world. We want to buy this product and we want to work there. Raise your hands if you want to work at Tesla. I think everyone should. Okay, raise your hands if that means that you would have to put down some nights and some weekends as well. I want the companies here to look around. Keep your hands up, please. I want the companies to look around here, right? Look at the hands that are up. This is the power, thank you, this is the power of giving our generation meaning. We will give you our days, our nights, our weekends. We will give you our blood, sweat, and tears as long as you give us meaning. We are one of the most powerful generations so far, but the companies need to know how to handle that. Give us meaning. So I want to end just talking about innovation and education really quickly. So you're going to hear these two words so many times next year because we're coming up on an election year, and you're going to see Stefan Löfven stand there talk about innovation, education, right? What I want you to think about are the things that we've been talking about today. Learning to implement a day one mentality, right? Learning to think exponentially, and do not plan on becoming an expert, right? Plan on becoming an expert at being a beginner. And the last part is learning to implement constant learning, right? You should always have a book and something that you are learning to do. And if I have an opportunity to affect you a little bit here, when our politicians are talking about these things, I want you to tell them that you know the real issue that they should be working on. And the real issue isn't innovation and education. We can probably solve that ourselves, right? The real issue is a society where innovation and education aren't the problem. The problem is that this will be our society. And our government needs to prepare for this. We need to prepare for this. Thank you.